Am I audible?
Yes, you're clear.
Wait, yeah. Getting it. I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. Knowing what you want and what you need is different. Jesse is what you want, but what you need is Nanda. I think the ship that has been sailed for long, has to now to have to be choose, right? We think we're at the age where we no longer have the time and the capacity to again to again search for a new law, for instance, or to gather more energy to get Jesse. We think we will settle down with Nanda. We think that is the best choice that Ariel can have. Few things that you have to remind to you in this debate. Ariel is 35 years old, meaning that why then he is not currently in a serious relationships is probably because of greed, right? Because in his youth, most likely he have idealisms that he wanted, the perfect persons or whatsoever. But we think at this age, most likely the interest of Ariel is to settle down, to have comfort, because the current world is that tiring. How current capitalistic world and his work, for instance, because as a wealthy from rags to riches, someone that we think is very important in this debate is a comfort and something to settle down. We think that is the most important thing in this debate. With that said, I'm going to talk about two things in my speech. First, I'm going to tell you why Jesse is not love, but secondly, I'm going to tell you why then Nanda can fulfill the parameters for can get fulfillments to Ariel, right? So first, why then Jesse is not love? Let's look at first why then we in the first place prefer Jesse, right? Jesse is because he's achieving and wealthy and attractive and so on, right? We think the reason why then we choose him because one, it is because of the capitalistic world that currently exists to say that people who are currently wealthy are people who are successful. These are people that you should admire to. These are exactly people who are work hard. These are people who are really, really successful that you should like in the first place. And secondly, pressure from the people, right? Like the beauty industry, for instance, to say that people who are really attractive. These are the people that you should look out for. These are people that really, really beautiful. That's where you should like them in the first place. Even people even in kindergarten, for instance, you say that that person is beautiful, that person is attractive. You should have liked them, right? These kind of pressure that exists inside society is something that was put into Ariel currently, and not necessarily their choice in the first place. What does it mean? It means that most likely Ariel doesn't necessarily like Jesse because of who they are, but necessarily they like them because the pressure coming from society, it's not love but pressure and just what you want to look good inside of the community, inside of society currently. Why the Nanda is love, right? Look at the time that they have currently. Yes, currently that we have rejected Nanda, but what happened? They stick with us anyway, right? Therefore, the time that we have with them, how currently we still keep in touch with them, how we're still comfortable with them, is what love is, right? We think comfortability and time shows how we currently still keep in touch with them in the end of the day. That's why we think the love in this debate is towards Nanda and not Jesse. We think there's a burden from the opposition side of the house to prove why then Jesse is necessarily the love that you need. We think the important principle in this debate on who are your spouses should be, right? With that said, how then, let's move on to the second argument. How then Nanda can create fulfillments towards Ariel, right? What does our Ariel need? Only two things, right? We think that they need comfort more than passionate love, and secondly, they need a stability that is a long-term relationship. For instance, their relationship is less likely to have more conflicts and so on, right? Why then this is the most important thing in this debate? Because notice that when the age where we are right now, most likely our physical and mental capacity is not necessarily high, right? That is to say, currently our we don't have that much time to invest into our spouses, for instance. We don't have that much mental capacity because we have tons and tons of works that we have to cater to on our side of the house, and we don't necessarily have the kind of lifestyle, for instance, to have the kind of time and have the kind of investments toward our spices, nor the time that we can towards them. That's why comfort and stability is something that is most important thing in this debate. How then Nanda can achieve that? One about comfort, right? What is comfort for them? We think that comfort meaning that you become your true self when you are with your partner, right? What does it mean? It means that that currently, note that when you work in a wealthy corporate, for instance, you still maintain your persona. For instance, you keep a mask inside of society. You have this kind of tensions around people. You cannot let go of all the tension that currently exists, right? This is where Nanda comes in, right? Because Nanda accepts you for who you are. Therefore, this is literally what you want. Because when you go back from work, for instance, when you go back home, that's the moment where you can be relaxed. When then you can be yourself. We think this is what a partner should be, right? Not someone that you still have to keep your mask on. This is why Jesse could never achieve this, because this high demand coming from Jesse is something that Ariel have to always be the perfect persons, right? Exactly why in the end of the day you cannot take off your mask. You literally have to always maintain this capacity so that the high demand of Jesse will be fulfilled in the end of the day, right? Exactly why we don't think that this is sustainable for them, right? That this is comfortable for them. There is a loss from the comfort that you get, right? Note that sure, maybe in the first or 2 months there is a honeymoon phase that you have with them, but most likely when we talk about relationship, problem will arise, right? And exactly that's the moment where you release it off, when you no longer feel the comfortability, when you realize that this trade-off is not something that is worth it, right? We think comfortability is the most important thing that you cannot trade off in this debate. What does it mean? This layers means 2 things. First, you can be your true self as an individual. This is very important because we think that a good relationship is not something where you have to sacrifice yourself, a sacrifice part of you, and lost yourself in it. We don't think that's a good relationship. A good relationship is where you can be yourself in the end of the day. We think as Ariel, this is a very important thing. But secondly, you are less tiring than on our side of the house, meaning this is going to be far better than stability, and your mental capacity to handle problems, for instance, that are going to arise in relationships is going to be far better on our side of the house in the end of the day. Lastly, let's talk about stability, right? Let's talk about long term. Note that we don't have much time, but note why then stability would not be achieved on opposition side of the house, because most likely you will never feel enough, ladies and gentlemen. When we talk about Jesse, and let's assume that they did get Jesse, with their high demands or whatsoever, most likely you are going to be inhumane, ladies and gentlemen, because there is always be comparison with people who are better, people who can achieve their demands in the end of the day, and that's their best case. Their worst case is that Jesse can just look for other people who are necessarily going to be far better than you in the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. That's why Jesse is necessarily not stable for you. It's going to be mentally draining in the end of the day, right? Why then Nanda can achieve there? Note that Nanda accept you because you are enough. This means that most likely that what other obstacle that you came in, most likely you are going to be far more stable. You're going to have a far long-term relationship, which is what you want currently in the age of 35, right? And most likely you don't have the kind of demand that you have towards Jesse like you have with Nanda, right? Because Nanda doesn't demand certain things for you, so most likely you're not going to demand such a huge thing from them anyway. For all those reasons, we're very proud to stand with Nanda.
Thank you for that speech. To open the debate from the opposition side, I call upon the leader of opposition. Here.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you're clear.
Let me arrange my timer. Okay. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. We don't have a word for the opposite of loneliness, but if we did, I guess that's all I want in life, as Ariel. We say that the loneliness I'm talking is the loneliness when you say that the one that got away, that the one that you just simply you compromise to being with Nanda, that you want with Jesse and you want to actualize it, but you say that you simply just want to compromise and pragmatic because there's Nanda that only there. We think that the life ahead, when you feel that you always visualize Jesse and you still having the mind of Jesse inside your mind in your relationship, is something that we don't want as Ariel. we say that we want to actualize what we want, what our desire to loving the Jessie as our love life to begin with. We think that as Ariel, we are going to choose over Jessie rather than Nanda at the end of the day. So before I'm proving to you why the Jessie is actually the perfect person that need to be the choices of Ariel, I'm going to debunk certain OG characterization because simply just judges don't make no mistake about how their characterization of JC that very unfair, right? Two things to say. First, when they said that there are a capitalist structure that creates this that creates Ariel to have this shaping why they like Jesse, we think that it's very unfair, or it's very cruel to like define how that the love of Ariel towards Jesse is simply because of this capitalism sector or of this external validation. Because I think because we say that the definition of love is very much defined by each person. So each people have different definition of why they want the person they love. We think that in here, noting that the attractiveness and the wealthy is what makes Ariel love Jesse. We think that that's not something that that's something that inherent in Ariel man. They say that it comes not from those like external capitalism structure that happens. It comes from the realization of how Ariel is having a sheer effort of how Ariel is working hard and not and valuable about how attractive and wealthy as a components of their love life. And we think that how that they see Jesse on the projection of that, we think that the love is very personal. The love is genuine and pure. We think that it's very unfair to characterize this simply just for the external validation. But second thing, when they say about the mass and personatics, I think the characterization of how like Ariel is 35-year-old and very wealthy, if they want to simply just like choose to they might have like much wealthy Ariel might have much wealthy friends at their bubble, right? And they can like pick and choose if they want to simply just do this attractive and wealthy. But the notion that they still choose Jesse over others, it means there are much other factors that why that's what that makes Ariel love Jesse. They say that how the attractiveness, how like Jesse is not only just an attractive and wealthy, they still a loving person and they have the comfortability, and Ariel feel comfort towards Jesse. That's why they want to really pursue Jesse over and over, and that's why we think that that's why even it means that in the relationship and the projection in the future, we think that the comfort and stability definition from Ariel is this relationship with Jesse. It means that they, in the moment when they go to relationship, they want to have those like persona or mask because they understand that Jesse is someone that they will love purely, and the relationship will be better for both. So I think that the characterization shouldn't be by at the end of the day. We think that this is a personal level. This is a sincere love how that Ariel towards Jesse. So what's on my argument? Two things to say. I'm going to prove firstly why relationship with Nanda would be so bad, and secondly why like choosing Jesse is better even at the expense of probability towards heartbreak. So firstly, why relationship with Nanda will be so bad? Two things to say. First, we say that notice in the moment when you choose Nanda, you're going to spend your whole life to change Nanda to fulfill Ariel's standard. That is to say that the characterization that Nanda is not fulfilling the standard of Ariel, and how Ariel have this certain projection towards Nanda, it means that the relationship will be very toxic at the end of in a sense that in a sense that how the whole life of the whole relationship is about how that Ariel changing Nanda to fulfill their standards, how like Nanda to be becomes lavish, or how Nanda to becomes those wealthy. We think that marriage is more than that. We think marriage about compassion. We think that marriage is about how you can exchange your emotion without the intention to like simply fulfilling standard. We think that the true love of relationship is when you love when you simply accept each other as Ariel just accept who Nanda is, and how we think that the toxic would be on the comparative on their side. But secondly, what's worse on the personal level of Ariel and both sides is that their life will be the relationship will be regarding how visual Ariel visualizations Jesse onto Nanda. So what most likely the relationship will be Ariel project Jesse towards Nanda at the whole life of the marriage itself. They say that this is based on two things. First, we say that it based on how that the love of the love from Ariel towards Nanda wouldn't be sincere because they simply just feeling that the love is the love still goes for Jesse and they and like Nanda is just a sidekick, then they create this projection. But secondly, it's also bad for Nanda because Nanda are forced to fulfill this certain elusive standard of Jesse that perhaps Nanda would not even know who she is herself. We think that the overburden of this Nanda itself, of course, would create those like uncomfortably and even to this depression, which going to hamper the relationship at the end of the day. But really what's important is that the regret. They say the regret on how they not Ariel were feeling that they are coward, that this not no that this the one that got away, that they are not that brave enough to actually express their love towards Jesse. Second thing, why choosing Jesse is better than the question is. First, we say that we're going to having more actualization of our love. They say, as Ariel, we can actualize what I want, what my personal compassion and my personal love is to Jesse, that how that I will not regret that my love at the end of the day that I already expressed myself. But secondly, we think that even when they said, oh, like there's a probability of rejection, we think that rejection is fine. Comparatively, in the moment when we get rejected by Jesse, we still have those like feeling already actualized. But secondly, we still get those emotional fulfillment from friendship from Nanda, right? They say like Nanda is still there to give you emotional satisfaction as a friendship. But comparative on their side, there's no one or no friendship as Jesse is not someone friendship, is someone just simply that are having the distance towards Ariel. So at the end of the day, in the moment when you heartbreak, you won't have anyone to comfort you. So the comfort and stability is better on opposition side. Very proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech. To continue the debate from the opening government side, I call upon the Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Check, am I audible?
Yeah, you're clear.
There's a beautiful song that fits this motion perfectly, La Vie en Rose. It's basically a song that tells you about how you see someone through a rose-tinted glass because you see all the perfectness in him, but you don't see the human characteristic of him, all the hatred, all the envy, all the gluttony, all of the greed that a person has, because you basically shove them off under the rocks and you only see the perfectness of that person. I think this fits perfectly the situation between Ariel and Jesse, right? And I think that it is not love. That means all the arguments coming from opposition, talking about, we don't want love for less. We want to let that someone to get away, cannot run, right? Because that is not even love. What they have to prove to you, why is it that you don't even know him that much? You only admire him with their sheer hard work, for example. But why is that love? I can admire an anime, for example. I can admire Kuro for his sheer hard work, but that is not love. That's admiration, right? And we argue sometimes it is much better for you to admire someone from afar so you don't break that bubble and you don't lose the happiness that you get from seeing that person, right? So I'm going to talk about two very important things in this debate. I'm going to talk about one, which one is true love, and secondly, I'm going to talk about the possibility of toxic relationships, something that I have personally endured and I don't want anyone in this room to endure as well. So first of all, why is it that truly loving someone is important? But before that, who do we truly love in the first place, right? Opening opposition came here and told us, look, it is cruel for us to say that we only love JC because it is society shaping, but because you admire their hard work. First of all, I think we have to admit, right, from the context like itself, that we have high standard, and JC is the one that can fulfill that standard. True, we might admire him. I might admire a certain coach from ITB, but I don't love him, right? I might admire his hard work, for example, but then the moment I got close to him, it explains that, oh, I'm not really that compatible with him. True, I might admire him working 24 hours in debating, but when we talk, we just don't connect, because to truly love someone, you need all this chemistry. You need to feel that you are listened to, and you need to have this deep communication in order to feel all of this chemistry, and all of that cannot be gained through sheer admiration. And this is why we think that what opening up position told you is not important, right? But secondly, we also think that you're going to break that bubble, right? Because no one is that perfect, and we think it is so much better for you to just admire Jessie. This is so much better for both Jessie and Ariel, right? Because, sorry to repeat yourself, but because we think that from admiring someone, you gain all of this motivation. You want to become a better person when you admire someone. You want to be like him, for example. You think that it is such a good thing that a good human being exists in this world. But the moment you got close to him, you are going to break all these bubbles, and that person just become another human. And you lose all the motivation. You lose all the inspiration that you have from seeing that person from afar. So we argue to you, ladies and gentlemen, that maybe not having someone, letting someone to be the one that got away, maybe the best form of relationship that you can have with other person, right? So why is it that choosing Nanda is very important? I think we are all very familiar with the concept of soulmate, right? Being, getting old with someone, becoming a grandpa and a grandma, eating cookies in your terrace and talking about your grandkid, for example. We all want this kind of relationship. We want all this kind of future, right? There's a quote here, find someone who doesn't make your heart skips, but someone who makes you feel at home. And I think that Nanda's and Ariel's relationship has been go through the test of time. Nanda has this love that has endured all of the hardship that you get. And actually, as a human being, love comes with familiarity. Love exists when you spend a lot of time with someone, because if you truly look at someone, you're going to see all the good, beautiful things from him or her, right? For example, it might seem menial, but the way he holds his cup, the way he listens to you, the way his eyes glitters whenever you told him your achievement, for example, all these small things can only be noticed if you spend a lot of time with someone. And this is why we argue, even in the best case scenario of opening position, when you actually settle for less, you can still find love and find joy in these small moments. And we think that is what actually matters, because it is impossible for you to be on top of the world. It is impossible for you to gain all the achievement. There will always be someone better, and that is why it is way more important to find joy and happiness in these small things. So this is why we've concluded, why is it that you're likely to find meaningful love when you find someone that can truly understand you, and that can only be gotten when you have endured the task of time, right? But secondly, possibility of toxicity, right? So let's talk about opening up position, what they brought to this debate. They argued to you that, comparatively, it is very bad because you're always going to settle for less. You're always going to project someone. I don't think so, right? To respond to that, first, it is very unlikely. Why? Because he's your childhood friend. You know him. When he still pees in his room, for example, you know what he likes, what are his hobbies, you know who they are. And because you know who they are, you don't hold him to this inhumane standard that you have for Jessie. Because when you see Jessie, you don't see a human. You see an object that is very great, and you always want him to be always greater. I love you because you are smart, but you love Nanda because you are Nanda, because of the small thing that we went through, all the moments. And this is why it is very unlikely for you to hold him to the same standard. But okay, assuming that Ariel wants that high of a standard, I think that will still exist in both sides of the house, right? So what is the tiebreaker? If Ariel always wants someone who is perfect, the tiebreaker here is the ability to communicate, the ability to understand, the ability to have bonds that can only be built with time. And you can only have bonding, you can only have communication when you are friends with someone for a long time. Conflict resolution, understanding someone, your point of view, making up after a very hard fight can only be done if you have a deep bond, if you have known someone for a long time. And all of this conflict resolution can only come from Nanda, right? But comparatively, in their sides of the house, when you love someone and you think that he is very good and I want to have you, I don't love you, but I just want to own you, you're going to create this imbalance power structure, it's already fixed. It is stated in the context that you might not be reciprocated. That means you have to make effort in order to make Jesse interested to you. That means you have to compromise yourself. You have to be that perfect girl. You have to do whatever Jesse wants you to do in order to own him. That means because you're always compromising, you're always losing yourself. That means whenever there's a fight, you're always going to be the one who says, oh, sorry. You're always going to be the one who have to apologize. And this creates a very toxic mentality where Jesse will have this very huge power over you because he knows that you want him, and basically he is able to do whatever they want, right? But lastly, we also think that it is very immoral coming from opening up position. You're going to get emotional fulfillment by befriending Nanda. Using someone for emotional fulfillment is just plain cruel, and this is why we're proud to propose.
Thank you for that speech. To close the opening half, I call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you're clear.
Can you guys see my video?
It looks clear.
Okay, I thought nggak muncul di mikrofonnya. 1 minute. Yeah. Test. I'm gonna start my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think that the biggest problem with side government is that they assume that, for example, that Jesse and Ariel are inherently not friends and they do not know one another. And it is very problematic, right? Because understand if Ariel, for example, sees Jesse and that Ariel knows that Jesse was also brought from the same level of poverty that he was in before, and that she became rich, for example, due to her sheer hard work, for example, it's very fair for us to assume that they have contacted to begin with. The fact that they have already chatted, already has experience with one another, seeing each other in conferences, seeing her stress, for example, is a proof to you that inherently this kinds of relationship is not something that's only admiration, but it's something that's actually become more. It's love and it's admiration to begin with. Because understand that just responding to their case, because they're stating that it's very unlikely for you to put standards because childhood friends. We say that no, most likely that these are human emotions. The fact that most likely Jesse would also be that Ariel would also been been raised with his own standards is not an exclusive method to prevent him from putting that same image and mentality of Jesse inside of Ariel to begin with, right? Because understand that because communication and all of those kinds of things are inexclusive to only happen on their side. Because on your side, when the relationship gets so toxic as what they say, we think that the relationship will be harmed to begin with, right? I'm going to extend 2 things in my speech. I'm going to talk about why compatibility is something that has to be prioritized. Number 2, I'm going to talk about which side would have the better relationship on their world. I'm going to extend now fast speech first. I'm going to explain to you how they are more compatible to begin with, right? Because understand that right now compatibility is something that's so hard for a person to find and understand, especially in Jesse's world, right? Because understand that when they say that Jesse is being put by capitalistic world and only being put by standards, we think that's an unfair characterization. Because most likely, if you see the context slide, that Jesse is formed by his experiences of being rich through sheer hard work, for example, and it's so hard for him to find another person who shares that same bond with him. His pain, his experiences, for example, is very hard to find until he finds Jesse, a person who understands him, understands his pain of being rags to riches, for example. Understand that maybe he has to work 24/7, has to find many different internships for himself, not to rely on his father's wealth, for example. The only person he can find is Jesse, and he feels that Jesse is the only one that could, for example, complete him on that way. We say it's very justified for him to understand, right? Because understand, like as a person who's been crazy for another person for the past few years, understand that there will always be a one for you to find that person to to find that person who relates back to you. Because sometimes, exactly because you feel so alone, you just cannot compromise because you've been disappointed so many times, right? That's why I think that Jesse is the only one that can complete him, for example. Because in the worst case scenario, if we'll be rejected, for example, understand that at least Ariel finds fulfillment, for example, because Ariel understands that the burden in his chest of loving that person, of seeing her struggle also, is something elementary to that we see that this is a he still has that friends and other people to understand him. We say that the worst case scenario is engaged to their case, right? Second clash, basically, which side will have a better relationship? Because Prime Minister, we say you won't get comfort because all you have in yourself is if questioning brave enough to find Jesse, to understand Jesse. Because when you wake up on the bed and when you beside you, you are with but it's Nanda, and Nanda is not Jesse. Understand, right? Because understand that he wouldn't find the same reasons to love Nanda just as he does with Jesse, for example. That's why most likely relatability wouldn't be expect and happening on your side of the house. Because, for example, if you're talking about small talks, we say that happens because most likely they are work colleagues, right? They understand one another also. They know their schedule. Does Nanda know how busy Ariel is, for example? Does Nanda know how hard Ariel puts into his job, for example? Because Nanda will also have expectations to begin with, right? We say it's a problem on this side of the house. That's why in comparison to Nanda, Jesse is just much more relatable because Jesse understands just how hard is it for you to be able to retain your wealth to begin with, to understand that there are just, things in the cantor or the office that you have to do to begin with, right? It is because if you'd say about high demand that is going to be put by Jesse to Ariel, for example, I think that they will be put high demand because they fit, right? Maybe they have the same friendship circle, like what Naufal said, for example. They have more things in common, for example, right? And it's more accessible because most likely they'll be raised, for example, on the same level, on the same spectrum to begin with, right? For example, but what happens in relationship inside government? It's unfair for Nanda. Why? Because Ariel will see Jesse into Nanda. He wants Nanda to be able to be dressing like Jesse. He wants Nanda to be able to be just as gracious as Jesse, for example. When Nanda maybe just couldn't compromise to that extent, for example, right? Because Nanda doesn't know just how busy Ariel is, for example, right? Understand that this platonic relationship is what you are risking inside government. Because on government side of the house, don't act and play as if only side opposition has toxic relationship. Government will too, and it's even going to be worse because the accumulation of the heartbreak you get when you guys split up, when you remember and see that she or he is your childhood friend, will be much more devastating when you guys are in a toxic relationship. When you remember him being in his pants, but now he's abusing you, we say that's very much harmful, for example, and even for Ariel himself, because most likely what Ariel is going to see is he's going to blame himself because he's the one that's in fact one that's attacking to begin with, the one that's attacking Nanda and visualizing her, for example. That's when the Naufal's harms comes in. Because Naufal's harm is the one that explains to you in regards as to how Ariel will react. Because most likely what Ariel sees is not a person that he loves, but it's a person that he's taken for granted, a friendship that he has seen to only be enough to satisfy him and comfort him, for example. Because understand that if Ariel already rejected Nanda once before, what does mean? It means that most likely Nanda just couldn't fulfill anything that Jesse gives to Ariel, for example. Understanding that that person is someone that is not in relate with him or her, we see that that's much more harmful. Why? Because side government would allow Ariel to have an illusion of power, thinking of himself as being happy, when in rejection he's just denying the fact that he's being unfulfilled to begin with. We see that's a harm that they have to engage to. We say that on our side of the house, at least you get that emotional fulfillment. Never been prouder to oppose.
Thank you for that speech. To open the closing half, I call upon the member of government. Here.
Sorry, am I audible?
Yeah, you're clear.
Okay. I take POIs. I take POIs through chat. No, sorry, through unmuting yourself. Yeah, maafin ko. Nervous. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So the opening government has established that Ariel wants to settle down. This is something that we agree with. But their parameter is that Ariel's relationship with Jesse is not love. Closing government thinks love should not be a parameter in choosing anyone, be it Ariel or Jesse, be it Nanda or Jesse, because we realistically think we can't prove that Ariel's choice of Nanda would be love and not pragmatic compatibility. So what we want to prove is why Nanda is a sustainable choice for Ariel in comparison to Jesse, regardless of whether this is an actual vague parameter of love. I'm going to talk about why attractiveness, wealth, and all the high standards that they like in each other between Jesse and Ariel can be taken away inevitably, and why Nanda's attraction towards Ariel is the only lasting attraction in this debate. So before moving on to my extension, I'm going to have several points of rebuttal towards opening opposition, right? Their biggest case is that, okay, this is going to be a bad relationship because Ariel is going to imagine what could have been if they picked Ariel instead of Jesse, picked Nanda instead of Jesse. We think that this argument is not an exclusive thing, right? We think that's the nature of relationship when you're facing lows. You can't help but to imagine what could have been with literally anyone else. When you're fighting with Jesse, for example, and they couldn't understand Ariel, most likely Ariel will also imagine what could have happened with Nanda. Most likely Nanda will be more understanding than Jesse because they've been friends for a long time. We think that even if you stick with Jesse, you will still wonder what could have been. That's the nature of relationship, right? If everything is smooth sailing and you meet a new co-worker, a hot, stunning young businessman, much more attractive than Jesse, much funnier, much more compatible, you will imagine that when Jesse is annoying the hell out of you. This is not a parameter that judges can use to determine who wins the debate. We think that open opposition needs to be thrown out. We think that their next argument about Jesse being a good person is also it's also something that you cannot use as a determining winning factor in this debate, right? Because you don't know whether Nanda is a good person or not. So the parameter of how you judge this debate should be, assuming Jesse and Nanda isn't averagely decent people, why is Jesse still open opposition needs to prove? Opening opposition's view of how overwhelmingly godly Jesse is cannot win this debate, and this is where closing government contributes. I'm going to talk about why it's very likely that attractiveness and wealth can be taken away, and why this is important, right? So the reason why attractiveness and wealth is a very volatile characterization are threefold. First of all, because wealth in a capitalistic world is very volatile, especially because Jesse and Ariel are set to gain their wealth through sheer effort. They're new money rich, right? They're not old money rich. They don't have intergenerational wealth that's going to stick around through recession and pandemics. These are business people who might lose their businesses because it has to close down during pandemics, for example, or managers, directors, higher ups, people who are educated, who are not immune to being laid off when they have to reduce employees in the workplace, right? We think that when it comes to like, for example, when you have unexpected accidents, for example, God forbid you got into a car accident and you have to waste a lot of your money in like hospitals, we think that that wealth can be taken away anytime soon, right? We think that is a very uncertain world. But second of all, attractiveness is something that goes away with time. With the impossibility of beauty standard that they're basing this relationship in, the fact that you become less conventionally attractive with age, or as time goes by, you become comfortable with your partner and you stop bothering to dress up, you stop bothering to wear makeup, you get pregnant and you increase in size, for example. We think that attractiveness is a very volatile characteristic and it's very dependent on the people. It's very dependent on your standards when you first like each other, right? So it's not just that, it's also that people become prettier every single day. You see all these people on the street with their fashion and makeup. It's very easy to compare something that is visible on the outside that you don't have that anymore. And one day when that wealth and attractiveness is taken away, it is very likely to be taken away, right? But the third reason why this is very easily taken away is because all these things become very likely because the debate concedes that this will be a long-term relationship. Most likely, they're going to be together for 10, 20 years. What happens in the future is unpredictable and it's unrealistic that they're going to live the rest of their lives without obstacles whatsoever. Inflation, changes in political regimes are all something that can impact their wealth and how their investment plays out, ladies and gentlemen. We think that even if, assuming the best case scenario where their entire personality is attractive and wealthy, unlike what the opening government tries to portray that they might have their own insecurities and demons or whatever, assuming that they can continue being attracted to each other regardless of their personality because of that wealth and attractiveness, we think that wealth and attractiveness can be taken away. So why is this the most
Points.
important thing in this debate? No, thank you. So why this is the most important thing in this debate? First of all, because this is the basis of their attraction, right? This is the reason why Ariel rejected a potentially stable partner out of Nanda, and also most probably the reason why Jessie can be attracted to Ariel as well. A relationship where you have to rely on a non-lasting characteristic is volatile. One day, if Ariel becomes poor or becomes unattractive, there is no guarantee that Jessie won't move on to other people, especially because a context like that, it's not even guaranteed yet that Jessie is attracted to Jessie is attracted to Ariel. We don't think that opening government can just hear their way out of this and stall our argument, right? Because we think that this is entirely different from having a good personality. We think that they can have a personality that is very compatible with each other, which is conceded to by the contact site. Most likely they know each other pretty well and they know how to be secure with each other. It's just that the basis of their attraction is very volatile and they can move on anytime soon. We think that even if Jessie leaving Ariel is not something that we can guarantee either. It's the constant insecurity that Jessie will leave Ariel if the wealth and attractiveness stops. This is very different from Nanda, who likes Ariel not for the wealth and attractiveness, and Ariel knows that this is not the standard imposed on Ariel as well. Assuming that both Jessie and Nanda both know the personality of Ariel and likes them for all their personality, all their quirks, and all their bad days, the reason why Jessie is attracted to Ariel the most is still the attractiveness and wealth, right? And this is different from Nanda. Second reason is we think that wealth and attractiveness is something that Ariel is very proud of, right? This is probably their number one source of confidence. It's seen from the way Ariel used this as a standard in looking for a partner. They believe this characteristic is what they deserve as a partner, right? When wealth and attractiveness is inevitably taken away from Ariel, they will most likely take a huge hit on their confidence. In this moment, you need someone who will for sure stick by you, and you cannot take a risk of someone who might contribute to your insecurity. If Jessie leaves Ariel in the midst of their confidence taking a hit, it will be very bad for Ariel's mentality, right? We think that this is very different from Nanda, who thinks that attractiveness doesn't matter. Most likely when Ariel's confidence take a hit, Nanda can explain other qualities that makes Ariel a great person, because those are the reasons that Nanda fell in love with Ariel. Assuming that Jessie doesn't even leave Ariel because of their attractiveness and wealth being taken away, I'm really biting the bullet here. We think that Ariel will continue feeling bad all over, because that's the reason why they become attracted to each other. There's this illusion that Ariel has that the reason why they are compatible with each other is not entirely because of personality, but it's most likely because of their attractiveness and wealth, right? So when attractiveness and wealth is taken away, they will continue to feel insecure. Please distinguish this from Oge, because we're not talking about not being able to be your true self. We think that wealth and attractiveness is their true self. It's about that being inevitably taken away. We beg to propose.
Thank you for that speech. To open the debate from the closing opposition side, I call upon the member of opposition. Here.
Wait. This is audible.
Yep, it's clear.
Thank you. Okay. Going my speech. In 3, 2, 1. Firstly, I would like to differentiate between the opening opposition and the closing opposition, because opening opposition has already explained about the attractions about the GC in itself and also the Ariel. But the problem of the case coming from the opening opposition is never characterized to you specifically how life of the 35 years old women looks like, ladies and gentlemen, how the struggle and how what they really need is, ladies and gentlemen. So that's why this kind of loophole that CEO want to come in, which is to characterize more what kind of their needs that really urgent for 35 years old in itself, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, that the premise coming from the opening opposition is as if that the Ariel is really that abusive, that Ariel is really want to change that the Nanda in itself, ladies and gentlemen. I think it is a very worst case scenario that brought by the opening opposition, and the closing opposition want to give more moderate cases, even if they not really that want to change Nanda in the first place, why it is better at the end of the day. But lastly, and the most importantly, closing opposition will be the tiebreaker of all benches in this debate, ladies and gentlemen, because everyone is only giving the premise, oh, this one will be toxic, this relationship will be toxic, but the closing opposition will give you that and acknowledge that both sides of the house relationship can be toxic, but the problem is which one can be and which one it can be get better, ladies and gentlemen. It's only can be explained by the closing oppositions as the tiebreaker of the toxic relationship. The most jargons of this debate have, ladies and gentlemen. With that said, two things in my speech. First, I'm going to explain how the relationship with Nanda looks like, and secondly, I'm going to talk about the relationship with JC. So going to the first one, talking about how relationship with Nanda looks like. First thing first, life of 35 years old looks like, because as a person who have a great career in the middle of the metropolitan city like Jakarta, I think I enough with my stress and career city in my life, ladies and gentlemen. And that is why what I really need is when I enter my house, I need to find someone who can give my fulfillment to myself, who can give the emotional fulfillment to myself, ladies and gentlemen, as the counterbalance of my life, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, the ones in itself is never be the Nanda and itself, ladies and gentlemen, under the three reasons, ladies and gentlemen, that I would like to explain. First, I'm going to talk about the relationship. Second, I'm going to talk about the emotion, and thirdly, I'm going to talk about the standard. Knowing on how Ariel is the ones who have a very high standard in itself, ladies and gentlemen, on how not only for her spouse, but also for herself, ladies and gentlemen, on how the likelihood is they more likely she has a well-educated, for example, they have a good career and still focus on that, ladies and gentlemen, have stable income, and that's why, and so on and so forth, ladies and gentlemen. Compare with Nanda is more likely the ones who likely to compromise, meaning Nanda is more likely is a mediocre, ladies and gentlemen. It means it is really more likely they are not really that educated as, for example, as Ariel, and not really as rich as Ariel, ladies and gentlemen. So these two different entities is just like earth and heaven, ladies and gentlemen, with two different backgrounds that cannot unite at all, ladies and gentlemen. What does it mean? Meaning the relationship between the Ariel and Nanda in itself, it will be a hierarchical relationship, ladies and gentlemen, based on the superiority and the inferiority and itself, ladies and gentlemen. It means the government characterization that they say, oh, we can solve these two different things through the communications and so on and so forth, ladies and gentlemen. I think it's less likely to be success under their side of the house, because knowing on how the moment you have two different backgrounds, two different connections, two different knowledge, ladies and gentlemen, it is less likely for you to have that connection that well, ladies and gentlemen. And that is why the salvation coming from government side of the house to have connection, to have a talking and so on and so forth is less likely to achieve under their side of the house, knowing on how the two different backgrounds that we have right now, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why more likely to be rejected under their side of the house. But even it will be worsened under their side of the house, because knowing on how the relationship in itself very, very sick in itself, knowing on how of the JC and the inferiority of Nanda, it means it will be less likely for Ariel want to hear what the Nanda tells, give a suggestion to her, ladies and gentlemen. And that is why it will be less likely for the constructive relationship from being good, and more likely to be destructive to the Nanda, because it will be a very dictatorial from the superiority of Ariel and stuff, ladies and gentlemen, and that is why it can be that so much. When if they said it can be communication and so on and so forth, it's less likely to exist, as I've explained to you, ladies and gentlemen. But moreover, on how there is, as the context that I already told to you, there is romantic attainment from the Nanda and stuff, ladies and gentlemen, and that's why it is less likely for him to have the good attainment to the Ariel and stuff, and that is why it is more likely to build a relationship, knowing on how there is still difference and there is no attainment of the relationship in itself. We say it will be felt at the end of the day. But secondly, I'm going to talk about disappointment and emotions, knowing on how, as a 35 years old, that already being single under 35 years, I'm looking, of course, for the ones who perfect, ladies and gentlemen. So that is why the moment I'm finding the ones who imperfect, it will be more likely to be, emotionally exhausted for me, ladies and gentlemen. And that is why disappointment and the and emotion will be more likely to be exist, and that is why the comparing mechanism that will be exist at the end of the day, and that is why it will be very, very impacted to themselves, ladies and gentlemen. And we say the compromising with Nanda is cannot be compromised at all. Okay, we agree that the compromisings will exist in all forms of the relationship. But the problem is the compromising with you and Nanda is a fundamental one, ladies and gentlemen. And here we're talking about the financial capability, and here we're talking about the role model, for example. The moment we're talking about a very capitalistic era right now, the financial capability is very important. For example, like the education for your child to go to, ladies and gentlemen. And here we're talking about, for example, the role model of your children, ladies and gentlemen. And that is why it is less likely to be achieved under your side of the house the moment the compromising is really the fundamental, and that's why we cannot compromise that at all. But lastly, I'm going to talk about the relationship with JC, knowing on how JC is more likely to also have a good education, also have a stable income, meaning there will be a similar background with me and with me and also with JC, ladies and gentlemen. And that is why if there is a toxic, let's take the worst case under our side of the house, will be a toxic relationship, meaning it will be more likely to be solved under our side of the house, meaning because we have the same backgrounds, it's more likely us to have a good communication and so on and so forth, ladies and gentlemen. But even if the communication can exist, I think you have to notice the coping mechanism of, example, like max, stable income, and so on and so forth, is something that already have by the Ariel and stuff, and that's why it's not a problem at all, ladies and gentlemen. But moreover, knowing how JC is a perfect guy, knowing on how Ariel is also a perfect woman, knowing on how she's also a perfect woman in itself, knowing on how it is less likely for JC to look into the others one, because to looking the ones like JC is very, very rare for being ladies and gentlemen. And that's why cheating mechanism from government side of the house is less likely to exist. But lastly, the word case coming from the closing governments, which we notice on how the acknowledgement and the realityness is only a starting point, and we don't think that will be a finished point for their side of the house. We are very proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech. To close the debate from the government side, I call upon the government whip. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah, you're clear.
Okay. POI through chat. I think what you really need to focus on in this debate is the fact that Ariel spent a lot of time to search for the right partner, right? He's looking for relationships that are going to be established for a long time, relationships that are going to be well developed, relationships that are going to be reliable, because yeah, he's aiming for the long game here. It means that the characteristic that judge needs to focus upon is whether who's the right partner that will be good as a partner in a long-term relationship. This is the most important thing. Exactly, because Ariel is not because he's 35, but because the search and journey for him to look for the right partner is a long time, ladies and gentlemen. So it's not only about going for a relationship when it's 35, but because he sacrifices a lot to get this partner and sacrifices a lot to get the right relationship to begin with, right? This is a parameter that are very reliant. So that's why the longevity is the priority. It's not about whether you're going to love that person or not. This is about whether the quality of that person's can amplify the relationship, can make sure that you're not going to be insecure because you only rely your or like self-esteem on wealth or not. We said that this is the most important thing that never been touched by anyone else other than closing government, right? By these parameters, it means that the most volatile thing in this debate is not about your personal interest. It's about externalities that's going to impact your wealth and impact your attractiveness. This is something that never been discussed, and we think that this is highly relevant to relationship because relationship is very dynamic, right? And that dynamic rely on whether externalities affecting the relationship or not, ladies and gentlemen. Whether there's accidents or whether there's going to be something that is very human to happen to you as a person in that relationship. Your wealth taken away from you. These are very relevant to everyday life. Should be the most important thing that Ariel prioritized in this debate, right? We said at the moment you made made choices, that's why we think that that's the most important thing. Secondly, we say that what distinguishes opening government and closing government is the fact that opening government assume we will always be insecure when we opt into a relationship because we're based on wealth and basing on wealth and attractiveness. First of all, we think that this is unrealistic. Why? Because the moment you're going to opt into a relationship, for example, they could always be secure because they're going to flirting phase in which they get to know each other. It's not like they're opting into relationship, they don't know each other at all, right? We said that the problem here isn't about people going to feel insecure because of they're relying themselves on wealth or because people do not know who they really are, but it's about you're opting into that relationship. Your self-esteem is based on your wealth and attractiveness, ladies and gentlemen. So those are very different things because you opting in feeling secure, but all your security reliant on whether you feel well, you have your wealth or you have the attractiveness or not, in comparison to just feel insecure as it is, like what opening government tried to defend. The problem is when you're doing this, all your bad qualities, the moment externalities comes in, the moment your wealth are taken away from you, these bad qualities will be amplified even more in this relationship, ladies and gentlemen, because you feel less as a person, you feel insecure as a person and not compatible to Jesse, the one who already who have like a secure relationship, or you're just ashamed when people attracted to you based on your wealth, for example. This is the type of things that we think are so bad and needs to be a priority of Ariel when they determine who is the partner in this debate, because this debate needs to operate under how it impacts Ariel as a person. Ariel will feel secure in the relationship or not, because other than he is in this house as Ariel, but also the fact that he's the one who's going to experience the relationship, ladies and gentlemen. Long-term relationship can only exist when you have the ability to not be insecure, when you're going to opt into Nanda. Why? Because Nanda is there before you become wealthy. It's there when you as a friend showcase on how that you're a different person who's not only defined by wealth, for example, how there's a process for you to know each other for a long time that shows you how Nanda are going to accept you as a person, or maybe Nanda is attracted to Ariel because he's this authoritative figure, because he's someone that matters to her the most. We think that this is the type of relationship that are going to be more fulfilling as Ariel, because he's not going to always needs to justify and to prove themselves all the time, ladies and gentlemen, because these people likes him as it is, like him regardless of all his flaws. So it's easier for him to be matter in that particular relationship. This is the key to a long-term relationship, because in order for you to ensure that this work, in order for you to not lose trust to this relationship, it's feeling that you're validated, it's feeling that you matter, not only reliant to your wealth, but also reliant on how you're a good person to begin with, right? So now let's talk about oppositions, right? So oppositions told you on how that most likely this is going to be very toxic. bear in mind that comes from both opening and closing, right? Only different characterizations. First of all, opening opposition told you how it's going to become toxic because you're going to impose standard to Nanda, and it's going to visualize Nanda as Jessie. First of all, when you're in a relationship, it means that when you come into a relationship, like what they say, relationship is going to be toxic. The decisions is already being made, right? As Ariel, you're already deciding that you're already deciding that okay, you already weigh that between Jessie and Nanda, you're going to pursue Nanda. What does it mean? The process for you to weigh the pros and cons and choose two options mean that Ariel will go into the relationship willingly, ladies and gentlemen, and knowing that these are two different people that have different characteristics, and I choose Nanda because she's different. And because she makes me fulfill more than anything else. What does it mean? The possibility for them to suddenly visualize or impose such a high standard for Nanda is basically non-existent, or I don't think it's going to be that overwhelming in general, right? Because he opting in willingly and want to choose to do that, right? Because we're not going to enforce him here. But second of all, even if he's doing that, visualizing or Nanda as Jessie, for example, we said this is normal for people to do it. It's the same like you're going to, like visualize Scarlett Johansson or like Chris Evans or your partner in bed, for example. It's shit, but it happens, ladies and gentlemen. We don't think that it's as bad as what they're trying to portray, or as toxic as what they're trying to portray, right? This is also explain the argument about power imbalance that opposing government talked about. We said that this, first of all, we want to question why is this the interest of Ariel to have a good power imbalance, knowing that I think for him to be fed off by relationship, feeling validated, it shows that he feels happy in that relationship. So we don't think that power imbalance is such a huge interest of Ariel to begin with, even if maybe it's selfish, but yeah, that brings happiness to Ariel. So what? But first of all, knowing that Nanda opt-in willingly means that she could like more authoritative partner, ladies and gentlemen. You cannot assume that every woman like partner who are going to always bring equality and stuff like that. The fact that she's attracted to him, for example, shows you that she could have preference of a more authoritative figure, and that's fine because she feels happy because of that, ladies and gentlemen. So because of that, we think that you cannot nitpick what makes it happy for Nanda, and you should prioritize happiness for Ariel. Proud to propose.
Thank you for that speech. To close the Open Grand Finals today, I call upon the opposition whip. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah, you're clear.
If you want to deliver a POI, please deliver it through a chat. Thank you. So I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kick out opening opposition or out of this debate, because the whole premise that comes from opening opposition is as if that this Ariel is already obsessive to Jessie, but they didn't really know each other. They haven't really started out anything. But I think what we should focus on, which is the real contribution that coming from closing opposition, is that we're going to focus on how Ariel is going to perceive herself by holding on to her values, and how this is going to influence her happiness and her relationship in the end of the day, right? But second thing that I'm going to ask the judges here, I need you to look closely on your paper that closing government or opening government never really defines who Nanda really is, why he was rejected at the very first place, what is he lacking, and why that suddenly the compromise that comes from Ariel towards Nanda can suddenly be accepted, and they can have finally long-lasting happy ever after relationship, especially in the closing government at the very first place, right? Because closing government argues to you that they will prioritize the quality and long-term relationship, but they never explain to you the worst case, in the moderate scenario from Ariel that comes from 35 years building her values and her standards is something that's okay at the end of the day. I don't think they matter in this debate, right? But two things that I'm going to talk about in my speech. First, I'm going to talk about standard. Is it really the source of suffering coming from Ariel as a 35-year-old woman, person? Second, I'm going to talk about, can I really be happy? Toxicity, insecurity is going to be discussed there. Okay. So first, about standard. Opening government. I think what you need to understand, it doesn't matter where do these expectations come from. It doesn't matter if Ariel is brainwashed by capitalist society, but what matters is the implication of that brainwashing towards her values to begin with, right? On how that the whole narrative of the society has already shaped her values, shaped her perception towards how she defines love, for example, on how that she applies her standard of living, on how that she structures her vision and mission in order for her to live out her life as goals, right? This implies that it doesn't matter if it's It doesn't matter if it's from brainwashing narrative, but what matters is that how ingrained the value is towards how Ariel has conducted their life and has made their decisions in their life, right? So what do you really need to understand here? That firstly, opening government case is self-defeating, right? Because they understand that there is an importance of chemistry, that there needs to be an emotional connection in order for you to be happy, and that's why they want to go for a platonic relationship. But one thing that you need to realize is how ingrained these values is towards Ariel, that she keep rejecting Nanda even if it has been familiar that long, that they have been long-term best friend, for example. But the moment that she realized that Nanda has already doesn't fulfill her standards, for example, that they maybe he wasn't really good at his job, he doesn't really have that high of an income, for example, and he wasn't really that attractive. I think that this tells you that no matter how familiar you are with Nanda, no matter how long you have known Nanda for 35 years all your life, her values, her standards is still stronger than the familiarity that it creates with the relationship with Nanda. This means that there is not going to be love or anything that's good for Nanda to begin with in the relationship that to build with Ariel to begin with, right? So that's first about opening government. Second thing, I'm going to talk about closing government, because closing government really talks in with the new idea that this is a volatile characterization, and that's why it's not reliable, right? I think that you are really undermining Ariel here, right? Because Ariel or any rational person in the world doesn't really define your relationship into one characteristic that he is rich and he is handsome, and that's why I want to marry you to begin with, right? I think that by the context slide on how the 35 years old woman is a very ambitious and hardworking girl, she doesn't really define this relationship based on the volatile characterization. But what differs is that she uses this volatile characterization as an entry point to build attraction towards a certain person to begin with. This is the first step in order for you to have attraction, to have entry point to build deeper emotional connection with a certain person. So I think that this is what's lacking with relationship with Nanda to begin with, right? Because she doesn't really have this emotional attraction. She doesn't really have any willingness in order for you to have this kind of deeper emotional connection, that you want to build your life together, for example, that you want to build your dream house together with your children. You want to have a pension house in Switzerland, for example. I don't think this kind of vision could exist without any emotional attraction that comes, because it's already platonic, and platonic relationship can happen with anyone to begin with, right? So I think that standard doesn't really is the issue here, but it's the issue of whether you have the emotional attraction to begin with, in order for you, that how that standard has already shaped your life to begin with, that you are shaping your life, you're structuring your life in the long term based on the standards. That's why this is something that's lacking under government bench, on why that this is something that's okay to compromise at the end of the day. So secondly, about whether that this is something that's going to rob the happiness of Ariel. One thing you have to notice, that having standard doesn't mean that you are going to be toxic, doesn't mean that you always have to have mask to begin with, right? Because this is something the whole government bench base their argument with, that they're going to be really insecure the moment that you create a standard. Because I think that as a 35 years old, you already have the emotional maturity to communicate out things, right? We're not really teenagers anymore who play cats and dogs with our crushes to begin with. So I don't think that communication is something that's really impossible, that you can communicate that what I want from you is here and there, right? That this is what I want you to improve to begin with. But as a 35 years old, I think that it's very fine for me to have a standard, because I think that arguments coming from government is an anti-standard in general, right? On how that the moment that I become a 35 years old, I want to have a stable income because I want to provide for my family. I want to maintain my high quality of living, that I want to have a Chanel powder for my cosmetics, for example. I don't want to compromise that because Nanda is lacking in his job and cannot pay for my Chanel powder, ladies and gentlemen. This is something that's very important, because the maintenance of quality of living is important for me to build a family that is high with education. I want a good and successful father that my children can look up to in every day. I don't want to wake up next to a loser that is lower than me. This is the toxic relationship that happens under that side. But what's the comparative here? I think that the moment that you acknowledge that the maturity in the relationship exists, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to be toxic at, every time we have standard, you're going to have constructive relationship, right? It means that you're going to communicate with, you're going to have a partner that helps you to become a better person. For example, like Jessie can push me to have better career decision in my office, for example. I think this is significantly important, that you become a better person and you self-actualize better, because you have a supporting partner with the same vision, with the same ambition to begin with. both government bench cannot win this debate because they never really characterize you the compromise of Ariel that he has to make in order for you to accept Nanda. This is a grave mistake, ladies and gentlemen, because you don't know what kind of happy relationship, what kind of process that can really make Ariel happy at the end of the day. If they keep on compromising herself, she loses herself. Very proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech. Very fantastic debate from everyone. Yeah, the judges will go into a breakout room to decide the results. Wait for the announcements in the JOVED group to know when the announcements for the closing announcements for all the speaker awards, judge awards, and the results of this final. Thank you, everyone.